Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is Election Edge, Tuesday's edition, 6 o'clock on the East Coast, 3 o'clock out west. And folks, we have a bang-up show for you tonight. We are going to dive into everything that is happening in the Trump-Harris election. I'm very happy to welcome Joel Pollak with me tonight. Joel is with Breitbart. He's an author. He's authored a book, What Trump Should Do His First 100 Days. The agenda, what Trump should do his first 100 days. Joel, welcome to Election Edge. Happy to have you as my guest today. So, Joel, let's start out with a topic that is sort of driving conservatives crazy right now. And we referred to it on yesterday's show, similar to when Ted Koppel did the hostage crisis back when the hostages were being held overseas. It's America Day 24. Kamala Harris is still no news conference, no interviews, no policy positions. And yet the mainstream media continues to just accentuate what they're calling the Harris honeymoon. Nothing but favorable news on her. And every time Donald Trump tries to speak, even when he's out communicating, for the most part, the mainstream media is critical. Joel, you have talked about this. What do you make about the current strategy of Harris and the fact she will not engage with the American people?
Well, I don't think conservatives should worry about it because, first of all, there's nothing that Kamala Harris can say that's going to discourage Democrats from voting for her. Democrats are thrilled to vote for somebody who seems to be living, as opposed to President Joe Biden, who is basically one foot in the grave. If I can, I'm actually not in the mood to be charitable to him. He's been spinning this Charlottesville fine people hoax. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically accusing Trump of being a neo-Nazi. So I'm actually fed up with Joe Biden. Normally I'd be quite nice to the president, but he's basically half dead. So Democrats are thrilled to have a candidate who seems to be alive and well. And the point of all this is that when the media cover Kamala Harris, they can say whatever they want. It doesn't really matter. Democrats are going to vote for her anyway. The concern for Trump and for his supporters has to be, are the Trump, let me rephrase that. Is Donald Trump doing enough to motivate his own voters? And Trump's voters are not taking their cues from the mainstream media. Trump's voters are not looking at what the pundits say. They're looking to him. They're looking to him for messages. And so we can point out all day the hypocrisy of the mainstream media, how they find out, for example, when Trump says no taxes on tips, they do all the calculations and say it's going to cost the federal government X amount of dollars because they won't be gathering that tax revenue anymore. And then Kamala Harris copies Trump's idea, says exactly the same thing. And the same news organization, I think it was CBS in this instance, comes out with a wonderful headline about how she's standing up for workers and all this nonsense. Okay. It's funny. I mean, it's entertaining actually to see just how they fall all over themselves for the Democrats. But just keep in mind, the job that the mainstream media does is to reflect the agenda of the Democratic Party. Democrats know that now. Republicans know that now. Liberals know it. Conservatives know it. Independents know it. So what conservatives have to do is forget about the game the media are playing and focus on how to motivate Trump voters, Trump supporters to get to the polls and vote, and to believe that voting can bring him back into office, because Democrats know that if they turn out in vast numbers, they can win. They've seen it in 2020 with the vote by mail scheme and everything. Democrats are simply motivating themselves to get back in this race after the misery of watching Joe Biden stumble around. And that's the joy that they're feeling. They're feeling excited. Well, Republicans had a very joyful convention back in July as well, because Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt and the Republican Party had been coming together and the platform's very good and people were very optimistic. So you've got to get back into that optimistic framework and not feel like, oh, they're all being unfair to us, because of course they're being unfair. Their job is to motivate Democrats to vote. That's their job. Okay. Yep. It's not really theoretically their job. Theoretically, they're supposed to cover the news, but Americans don't rely on the media for news anymore. So let's deal with the reality we're in right now, which is that this election is winnable, but it's only winnable if Trump and the conservatives get together and develop a vision for what the future is going to look like when he takes office, which is why I wrote the agenda, and get out there and vote.
Joel, let me ask you this. In reading some of your work, which I did for our show today, you wrote a column for Breitbart. And in that column, you basically, I think your message was they're trying to show you that it's joy, that it's happy, but really behind that facade, it's not joy and happiness in the Democratic Party. Share with our viewers and listeners, what you meant by that column, because you really took him apart, both Harris and Governor Walz, over what the sort of the facade image that they're trying to get across, basically painting Trump as this old narcissistic negative person, and they're all happy and smiles about the future of America.
Well, I don't doubt that there are some excited people on the Democratic side. If you want to call that joy, then go ahead. I think that the better term, the more accurate term, would be relief. I think Democrats are happy because they're relieved, as I said, that they have a living candidate and not a dead one. And so they're excited that someone's going to represent their point of view, and at least they have a competitive shot at the presidency. They like it when they have total control, and they know they have total control of the media and Hollywood and so forth. So I guess there's a kind of joy in that. But I don't think that the left is really capable of joy, because the entire left-wing world, the entire left-wing worldview relies on feeling like the world is a dark place and it needs radical intervention, it needs transformation, it needs redistribution, it needs fundamental change in order to be happy. Left-wingers are not typically happy people. And if you look at the language that Harris and Walz have been using, Harris has this stump speech that she repeats almost verbatim at every single campaign appearance. I would be annoyed if I were a Democrat who stood in line to get into one of these events, because all you have to do to hear what she has to say is play back what she said the previous time. And she says, "I know Donald Trump's type," after she runs through a long list of people she claims to have prosecuted. Well, what she's doing is she's using a stereotype. She's listing groups of people and then saying that Trump can be understood as one of those people somehow. Like, you can understand this individual from the traits that she's assigned to these groups. That's stereotyping. And, you'd think that a civil rights icon like Kamala Harris claims to be would understand that stereotyping is harmful and not good, but that's what she's doing. And then Tim Walz comes up and he says that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are weird. Now, weird is kind of a junior high school insult where you describe the kids who are a little bit nerdy, kids who don't quite fit in, they're weird. So what you see with both candidates is they're using language that tries to distinguish between an in-group, kind of a popular group, and an out-group. And the out-group happens to be at least half of America. And that's not joy, that's division. That's saying, okay, the only people who can really be in our little shindig here are those who vote Democratic, and everybody else is weird. Everybody else has a type. Oh, we know that type of person. It's condescending. It's kind of classist, if you want to use a left-wing term. And I think that it betrays who they really are, that they're, in a way, just elitists. I mean, if you look economically, who's voting for Harris? People who make well over $200,000 a year and people who make less than $30,000 a year. It's the very rich and the very poor. And who's driving the message? It's the very rich. And the very rich are saying, you can't vote for Trump. You can't hang out with the people who like Trump because, as Peter Strzok infamously said of Walmart people, they smell different than the rest of us. The people in the middle, the people who pay the taxes, the people who start the businesses, the people who are from the heartland, they're weird, they're different. We put them down. We want to vote for an elite. And by the way, this elite proves its nobility and its worth by helping those at the bottom, of course. So it's an alliance between the nobility at the top and the poor at the bottom. And the poor don't really get much say in this equation, but they're happy to vote for whatever goodies the nobility will bestow upon them. And our nobility, our elites, then want to be thanked for it, and they think they're the only ones who can be trusted to govern. So what they're doing with their language is not particularly joyful. It's actually just divisive. And that's why I wrote my column.
Yeah, and it was an excellent column, folks. You can go to Breitbart.com And you can see Joel's column up there, and he's really spot on this, because one thing about the Democratic Party I've noticed, Joel, they love to divide. I mean, that is their whole strategy. You cannot find any policy positions. And folks, the reason you can't find the policy positions is nobody in their right mind would vote for these people if you actually saw their policy positions. Madam Producer, you may want to key up that Dave McCormick ad that so appropriately says what Kamala Harris's positions are. And on the other side of that, we'll tell you what she's trying to say right now.
Kamala Harris is inspiring and very capable. The more people get to know her, they're going to be particularly impressed by her ability.
The nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator.
I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
What is the solution for voters in the fossil fuel industry?
Giving the workers an ability to transition.
We're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct.
Raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation.
Abolish ICE.
Yeah.
Is that a position you agree with?
And we need to probably think about starting from scratch.
Outdated, it is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street.
Would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
You know, the food pyramid. What people
Yes. Yes.
to reduce red meat specifically.
Yes.
People who are convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bomber, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation.
We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
So for people out there who like their insurance, well, they don't get to keep it?
Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on.
I am opposed to any policy that would deny any human being public health, period.
The more people get to know her, they're going to be particularly impressed by her ability.
Joel, I have a tendency when a politician says something, their initial feelings are what they really believe. And I don't think it's any surprise that she's not running on those messages. I mean, she has told the voters in Pennsylvania she's not going to be against fracking. She has disavowed her position on single payer Medicare for all. I mean, Joel, those are some pretty frightening positions. And if even a fraction of those were implemented, this country would take a huge lurch to the left.
Right. Well, they're going to try to claim that those aren't her positions anymore, but it's going to be pretty difficult, especially because she went on the record. She was running for president when she stated most of those views. So how can it be that your views change from one presidential election to another? I mean, when you run for president, you tell people who you are. And voters want a leader. Voters want people in office who understand what they're there to do, who have some sense of conviction. You might disagree with the views of the person who's in office, but it's always better to have someone who has a view, as long as they're willing to listen, but someone who has a view. And she's now going to pretend that she doesn't, that all these things that she said she would do as president if she ran, if she were elected in 2020, that they don't matter in 2024. She hasn't really walked back any of them. We've heard a couple of statements from the campaign, but she was the most left-wing senator, as you saw in that video, as rated by GovTrack, more left-wing than Bernie Sanders. And if you look at the personnel she hires, the people around her, they're also lefties. I mean, she's just named her liaisons to various different faith communities. The liaison to the Jewish community is a rabid left-wing anti-Israel activist, and the liaison to the Muslim community is the same. I mean, you're not telling people anything different from what your position had been in the past when she boycotted pro-Israel conferences and hired anti-Israel personnel. Kamala Harris is going to govern as a radical. And keep in mind that the Biden administration itself is run essentially by far left wingers. He was one of the first candidates we've ever seen who did not move back toward the center once they had secured the primary nomination. Most candidates run to the left if they're Democrats, or to the right if they're Republicans in the primary race, and then they come back into the middle for the general. Biden didn't do that. Biden ran to the left and then kept running left. And that's because he needed the Bernie Sanders base to get him into office, because he didn't have a political machine. Nobody liked Joe Biden in 2020. So he had to get the party's activists excited. And the only way to do that was to borrow Bernie Sanders' language to borrow his policies and eventually to borrow his personnel. And that's who came with him into the White House. These left-wingers, yeah, there were some old Clintonites and some Obama staffers and so forth, but the Obama staffers were also very left-wing. And even though he was, quote unquote, a moderate at the center of his party, he threw out a lot of his moderate positions. You know, he used to be against imposing abortion until birth. He used to think that Roe versus Wade should be limited, and he threw all that aside. He was against the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, which the Hyde Amendment prevents the federal government from spending money on abortion. Biden supported that, and then he threw it out when he was running for president. So he moved to the left significantly because his party has moved to the left, and that's who Kamala Harris is bringing to the White House if she comes back.
Oh, it would be worse than Joe Biden, no question about it. Joel, we're going to take a quick break right now, but when we come back, I want to dive into Joel's book about Trump's first 100 days, and I want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's interview on X last night. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store, a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most precious assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott Precious Metals at 720-605-3900. That's 720-605-3900.
And we're back, and a special thanks to Dr. Kirk Elliott. They're an excellent, excellent precious metals company. They've been a huge supporter of Patriot TV, and anything you can do, if you're thinking about gold and silver investments, call Dr. Kirk Elliott. They have a great team. All right, Joel, the other side of the break, I wanted to talk to you. You wrote a book about Trump's first 100 days, the agenda. Share with our viewing audience what you're advocating that Trump do, because this election's 1 point here, 1 point there. It's effectively tied right now. Under the assumption Trump wins, Joel, where would you like to see him go based upon the thoughts you had in that book?
Well, look, let's take a step back. I wrote this book because I was frustrated seeing Trump prosecuted for petty non-crimes, really, in New York. And rather than sit around feeling angry and frustrated, I thought I would channel my feelings and my efforts into a positive direction. And I wanted to sketch a view of what it would look like when Donald Trump takes office in January 2025, what it would look like and what it would feel like. And I decided to set out an agenda of things that he could do as soon as he took office. That's necessary for a variety of reasons. First of all, it looked to me at the time in May that Democrats would control the House. Now, that may not happen, but if Trump has a divided Congress, he can't rely on them for anything. we also learned in 2017 that even with Republicans in control of both houses of Congress, there's no guarantee that they're going to do what Trump wants them to do. So he has to come in with an agenda of his own. And then I thought, the media, which is, again, terrible to Trump, they're not going to give him a honeymoon. They're not going to wait to see what he wants to do. They're going to make the narrative about who gets to replace him in 2028. They're going to move instantly on January 20th. They're going to move to talking about the candidates for 2028. So in order to avoid being a lame duck, in order to avoid the stiff opposition he faced in 2017 and the incompetence, let's say, of Republican leadership, he has to come in there with a series of actions that he can undertake on his own based on executive authority that's given to him in the Constitution. So executive orders, executive actions, different policy changes that he can make. These are all things that can be done in the first month. And I started with what I thought were the top priorities: restoring the rule of law, securing the border, fixing the economy, and I worked down from there.
Joel, those points that you brought up are all common sense points. I had someone talking to me the other day, and they initially were going to be a Harris voter, and I started talking to him. I said, well, do you want to secure a border? Yes, I want to secure a border. Do you want to have inflation come down? Yes. Well, inflation has been coming down, but under Biden, from the time he took office until now, it's 20%. I said, do you want less drugs in the country? Well, yes, of course I want less drugs. Do you want less crime? Well, yes, of course I want that. So it was plain to me all the issues were on Donald Trump's side. So we have a situation now where Trump is literally, from the time he did that news conference in Mar-a-Lago over the weekend to when he went on Elon Musk's show last night on Twitter Spaces, on X Spaces, Joel, I thought Trump did a damn good job last night talking about his policy positions and what he was going to do. And he talked extensively about the economy. He talked extensively about his plans for immigration. And when people hear immigration, they think about people coming across the border, but they don't think about all the social implications of it, Joel. We have laws in this country where you have to educate kids, you have to feed people, you have to house people. Whether they're an illegal immigrant or not, and there's been 10 million come across since Joe Biden's been president, those needs still have to be met, and people don't think about the social implications behind them. So while Kamala continues to get the golden press, at some point during the election cycle, Joel, I feel that as these positions get put out there, people will start to have to listen to what the key issues are. And I think since the vast majority of voters believe in these issues that Donald Trump is talking about, I think long-term and short-term, that's going to benefit Donald Trump. What say you on those pieces?
You have to understand the Democratic voter in this country. The Democratic Party voter does not care about issues. They don't. They just don't care about the issues. The Democratic Party voter in this country votes because of a self-image that they have and because of a concept of what kind of country they see themselves exemplifying in their vote. So it's really much more about a posture. It's about what's culturally familiar to them. It's about being part of a team. And the bonds of that team are reinforced, not because Democrats are so cohesive or close-knit, but because they've so demonized the other that they'll never step out of line. I saw an interesting poll a few weeks ago saying that for Republicans, the economy was the number one issue, but for Democrats, it was number 5 or number 6. Now, if you talk to most Americans, they would tell you that the election is about the economy. People are upset about the economy, and as Bill Clinton and James Carville famously said, it's the economy, stupid. But Bill Clinton was trying to reach voters in the middle. And Democratic Party voters do not care about issues. I'll give you an example. And again, it's from my own community, but I'm Jewish and the issue of Israel is very important to me. And for the last year or so, since October 7th, Jewish people have been very upset to see the violence that's being directed against Israel and to see the anti-Semitism on campuses and in city streets and the bias in the media. And that's been true of people on the left and the right. But most of those people on the left are now falling in line behind Kamala Harris, even though they know that she would be bad for Israel, and Biden has been bad for Israel, and Trump was great for Israel. 4 years of peace under Donald Trump before you even get to all the things he did, the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, the Abraham Accords, all the great things he actually did. 4 years of peace, no war, none of this campus nonsense. So Trump is obviously the better choice on this issue. Now, maybe you're a Jewish voter and you want to vote for Kamala Harris because of some other issue, but if you're going to come to this issue, you got to choose Trump. Except what I hear in the Jewish community is that Democratic voters are starting to rationalize their decision to vote for Kamala Harris anyway. And it was never in doubt. They're saying things like, oh, well, you know, she did this one thing once upon a time, or she's married to a Jewish guy, or, you know, it doesn't really matter who president whoever is, because they're always going to support Israel when it comes down to it, just like Joe Biden supported Israel before he didn't. And so they're just rationalizing their choices. They're not making informed decisions about the issues. When you talk about issues, you're talking to Republicans and you're talking to independent voters who, and there are some, who make decisions on the basis of which party offers the better policy and the better leadership. So Republicans have to remember, trying to convince Democrats to change their minds now is done. It's not happening.
Yeah.
What you have to do is go after the voters that Kamala Harris has left on the table. She's made a number of mistakes. Picking Tim Walz as a running mate was a major mistake. Now, she did that because she knew that picking Josh Shapiro from the swing state of Pennsylvania would antagonize the anti-Israel faction in her party. So she chose a sort of consensus candidate who can help keep the party together. But he's not going to bring anybody else in. He's not going to add to the Democratic column. He's a left-wing governor from a failing state who doesn't stand out too much, so he's not going to steal the limelight from her, and that's it. There's nothing else he brings to the table. They are running the old strategy which Obama pioneered of reaching out to their base voters, and the media play right along because the media are basically the same people as the Democrats. They're from the same Ivy League schools. They are from the same cultural backgrounds. They're from the same suburbs. They send their kids to the same schools. They marry each other. There's no difference between the Democrats and the media. And you can talk until you're blue in the face about policy positions. You'll win a lot of arguments on TV, but you're not going to convince them. I'll give you another example. I was on TV last week talking about Tim Walz, and they had two Democrats and they had me. And the Democrat was going on and on about how wonderful Walz was because of the things he's been able to do in Minnesota. And what she meant was all the social legislation. He hadn't been able to do any of it for his first 4 years in office because Republicans controlled the state legislature by one vote. But once they got rid of that Republican majority and had a Democratic majority in both houses, he could do whatever he wanted on transgenderism, you name it, all the radical stuff. The one thing he didn't do was fix the state's economy. So I brought that up and I said, look, Minnesota's economy lags behind the rest of the country. It's got rising crime under Tim Walz. It went down in 2023, but it rose the rest of the time he was in office. And so on and so forth. Look at the results of his term in office. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to talk about results. They don't want to talk about policies. They just want to talk about, oh, he used to be a high school football coach, even though he was an assistant coach, not the head coach. He was a teacher. We don't know if he was a good teacher. There are lots of bad teachers. And there's a problem with teachers' unions. They're running my state, California, into the ground. So, what about his educational record? How did he do as governor in office? Education's gone down the tubes in Minnesota. Used to be one of the top states. Now it's sinking like a rock. But, they don't want to talk about the issues. They just want to talk about this personality, identity stuff. That's what voting is for a Democrat. So I hear your frustration talking about the issues, but they're not going to talk about the issues. Talk to independent voters and Republicans about the issues. You got to do more of that.
Oh, 100%, Joel. And folks, when you think about how the electorate's made up, 28% of the electorate is Democrat, 27 and change is Republican, and the balance is independent voters. So you take the independent voters, whoever wins the independent voters is going to be the 47th president of the United States. We're going to take a quick 90-second break. But, Joel, when we come back, I want to talk a little more, and you were sort of kind how you put it. I refer to it as the Hamas wing of the Democratic Party because that's what it is. And with these college kids coming back to school and with the DNC next week in Chicago, I've already seen some of the efforts put forth by the Hamas wing and what they're looking to do. We'll talk about that a little further when we come back. See you in 90 seconds.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, my name is General Mike Flynn, and I'm here to talk about a limited time offer of subscriptions to Patriot.tv and how you can become a member of our Patriot Defenders subscription club and become a member of Patriot.tv. Really, it's America's network. I call it the home of truth. And you can do that for only $9.99 a month. It's a great deal by itself, but what I'm going to walk you through here in these next few seconds is a couple of package deals that we have that are unbelievable. The next membership was the annual membership at $99 that you can save. Right away, you save $20 if you come in at the annual subscription rate. The best deal that I think that people ought to seriously consider is the 2-year membership at $159. And it includes a special edition of my recently released documentary, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. So along with the 2-year membership, the 2-year subscription will send you a DVD combo of the film, plus an option to stream the movie online, as well as exclusive interviews of Tucker Carlson, Devin Nunes, and myself. So go to the home of truth, right? Go to Patriot.tv today, sign up, seriously consider the 2-year subscription rate. It's an unbelievable savings. I think it's a total savings of about $70 from just signing up on a monthly or a annual basis. So thank you very much for your support. Patriot.tv is America's new network. Thank you.
And we're back. And again, a special thanks to General Michael Flynn. Had the opportunity to spend the weekend with the General here in Southern California. And boy, what a great ambassador for Patriot TV. Click that Patriot Defenders button, become a member. We've got great content coming for you, some special events for Patriot members, more good stuff to follow. So, Joe, before we came to break, one thing that has really disturbed me, and I went back again, I looked at some of your work, and you had made a comment. I can't remember who you were interviewing with. It might have been the late Lou Dobbs. But you were talking about how Barack Obama promised to transform the country. Well, in my opinion, Joe Biden did transform the country because under his watch, again, 10 million illegal immigrants in the country, massive left-wing policies. He actually implemented a lot of things that I believe Barack Obama wanted to accomplish. And when I look and see what his administration has done in these 4 years, it's scary thought, Joe, but it almost looks to make the Obama administration a moderate and the Clinton administration a conservative outfit compared to what Joe Biden has actually done to this country and his administration. And the thought of bringing in Kamala Harris to be the next leader of this country would push us further to the left. And then I take those pieces that you mentioned and I'm saying what used to be normal is now completely upside down. Never in my wildest dreams ever could I imagine an ally of the United States, Israel, lose over 1,200 and maybe close to 1,300 now that a lot of the hostages, have been killed, have almost 1,300 of its citizens killed, and that would be like in the United States 20 times that amount based upon the population of Israel. And to see what I saw last summer and what you saw and what I believe we're going to see at the Democratic Convention from the Hamas wing, just the blatant anti-Semitism, the support for Hamas over an American ally, a country we've been basically brother and sister with for over 50 years. I mean, Joel, where is this coming from and how in the world did the Democratic Party become the Hamas party?
Well, it all comes from a desire to overthrow the country, overthrow the existing culture and values and constitution of the country. And you're right that Barack Obama didn't achieve quite the level of transformation that Biden has achieved. Although I would say that Biden's main transformation is, as you point out, the migration, the millions who've come into this country. And look, some of those people who might eventually become citizens if Democrats have their way, some of those people might preferred Trump. I don't know if you remember, there was a Fox News interview of one illegal migrant who said that if he were American, he'd also be concerned because he's okay. He just wants to work. But a lot of people coming through are really bad people and you don't know who they are. I don't think that Biden transformed the country in some of the other things that he did. You know, his signature pieces of legislation. I mean, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, so-called. I mean, what has it done? The infrastructure bill, it allocated $7.5 billion to electric vehicle charging stations. They've only built 8 of them in 2 years. But aside from that, you don't exactly see consumers rushing to buy electric vehicles because people have range anxiety. They wonder they worry they're going to run out of battery, and they're expensive. They're hard to get rid of, to dispose of. And look, no government in history, none, not even the Soviet Union, has ever managed to transform humanity. And that's where communism failed, and that's where Biden will fail. Because you cannot coerce people to participate in a failing society. At some level, people just back away. And that's one of the reasons that the military, for example, has had so much trouble recruiting new soldiers and sailors and Marines, because people don't want to join a military that is run on woke ideological lines, where your job as a soldier is to be indoctrinated for 4 years with whatever the left wants to fill your head with, and then send you to some war that they don't know how to get out of and don't know how to win. So you're seeing military recruitment drop off. You're going to start to see more capital sit on the sidelines, which is what happened during the Obama era, because he wanted to regulate everything and tax everything. So even though there was an economic recovery going on after the post-financial crash, the big money stayed out of the economy because they wanted to wait to see what happened after 2016. Got back into the economy. We saw rapid economic growth under Trump. But you just can't coerce people to participate. So yeah, Biden's passed a lot of laws. Kamala Harris cast a lot of tie-breaking votes for really bad legislation. But aside from the border, where they've been able to effect a massive transformation simply through their own neglect, you don't really see them doing anything successful that transforms the country. Americans are still Americans. The character of Americans depends on our churches, on our families, on our schools, on the values we transmit. It does not depend on the government, and actually the government cannot change it. Now, the government can enact policies that create incentives for bad behavior, and over time I think we have actually seen that. We've seen something of a deterioration. So I think the government has a role to play in transmitting values from one generation to the next. But Democrats, in their attempt to overthrow American values entirely, have not really been successful. You can make all the woke Hollywood movies you want, but you still have to get people to pay for them. And people don't want to pay for them. So I think you're right that he's been the most left-wing president. I don't know that he's been the most transformational president. I still would give that to Obama or FDR. And Obama, because he really planted the seeds of what we're seeing now today. I mean, Obama didn't just change the way our government works. Obama changed the way our culture addresses politics, and not in a good way. You know, we have every Democrat politician now vying to be the next Obama. And what Obama brought with him from Chicago was a style of politics that does not work with opposition, that doesn't recognize any rules. And I guess they had a chip on their shoulder because they felt that Republicans were unfair in the election of 2004 because they brought up John Kerry's military record. So what became valued among Democratic political types was a willingness to go as hard as possible at the opposition, even if that meant breaking the rules a little bit. And so they've really taken that to the next level with some of their tactics, some of their campaigning. And Obama brought that in. Obama was the guy, he and his team, they brought that in. The idea that, for example, the president doesn't have to tell the truth. You can fact check Joe Biden as many times as you want. He's not going to change his story. He just sticks to lies about Charlottesville and whatever. But that came in with Obama. So I would put Obama as the most transformative. Biden, in a sense, is Obama's third term, or maybe Jimmy Carter's second term, as he's often described. But Biden's done a lot of damage. But, you know, I learned from watching my kids go through woke education at public school, there's no real way to teach nonsense. You can turn off the parts of people's brains that notice what's real. So you can make conservative thought, let's say, so unfamiliar that people don't know what to do when they encounter it. But you can't really convince people of the truth of liberal thought. You can convince them not to have other thoughts because it's dangerous. But you can't really convince them that what they're being told to believe and vote for actually works.
Well, a point well taken. But the interesting thing is this, Joe, we're 84, 85 days out from an election. And the right track, wrong track in this country, it's astounding. I mean, 2/3 of Americans think we're on the wrong track. A third think we're on the right track. And that's probably that Democratic segment we're talking about. Joe Biden as a president, his approval rating was mired in the 30s, mid-30s. And now that he's out of the race, miraculously, it's gone up into the mid-40s. So we have a situation on our hands here where the American electorate as a whole wants change, and yet these polls are extremely tight. And we've talked extensively here on Election Edge about the 7 swing states. And Joel, here's the really interesting piece is this when we talk about whether it's identity politics of the Democrats, policies on the economy and the border, what's going to win out? Trump's personality, he's got strategists telling him, Mr. President, you've got to stop with the name calling. You've got to stop this. You've got to, focus your energies on painting a contrast between what you believe and what Harris believes. But Joel, listening to what you're saying and the fact that the Democratic Party is made up of these special interest, monolithic type groups, it's banded together through identity politics. And that's a tough order to defeat. But Trump was defeating that up until when Joe Biden left and Harris came on board. So the question is, with 85, 84 days to go until the election, which side is going to win out? Well, let me give you a little bit of a clue here. We, as Joel was talking earlier, we talk about these issues and policies, but you know what? The people who are going to be voting that are the differential voters in these 7 swing states, most of them don't go to Trump rallies. Very few, if any of them, will watch cable news, as we were talking about earlier. Most of them do not watch mainstream media anymore. And they're not following this race, inch by inch, yard by yard, like maybe Joel or myself or the people watching this show are, who have a really dedicated interest in making sure Donald Trump's the next president. Half of those people, I saw a survey today, Joel, half of the people did not even know Kamala Harris was the border czar. So you think, well, she's the sitting vice president, and the idea of trying to tie her to Joe Biden's policies might make some sense from a practical point of view, but the overwhelming majority of these undecided voters, they don't even have a clue of what she stands for, what her policies are. So, question, Joe, will we learn at the Democratic convention what those policies are, or are we going to have to wait until, quote, the end of August when she finally grants an interview?
We're not going to learn much about her policies. I mean, they're planning some kind of rollout of economic policy, but nobody actually believes that that's going to be her policy. The Democratic strategy is to make Kamala Harris as generic as possible so she can't be tied down to anything. So Republicans are going to have to make ads explaining exactly who she is, and Democrats are going to try to silence them and distract attention and so forth. But look, again, the question really is what kind of country we want to be. And I don't think that the Democrats are actually running a winning strategy right now. You pick Tim Walz, he's a left-wing candidate. You talk about identity politics, as you mentioned, to the extent she talks about anything at all. And, that's not something most Americans go for. I just think she's running a losing strategy, staying away from the media, etc. But she's not going to lose to Trump by default in the way that Joe Biden might have done, because Biden was old and everybody saw it. He was failing to perform basic functions. And Kamala Harris will fool enough people maybe to drag herself across the finish line. Trump's got to go and get it. Trump's got to convince his own voters that there's a better future on the other end of that election day. And what they have to do is they have to mobilize, they have to donate, they have to get together. That's what I tried to do with the agenda, to create a positive vision, something people can work towards. You know, if you want to build the wall, it's in there. It's in the agenda. If you want to lower inflation, it's in there. There are things the president can do to lower inflation. If you want to see the January 6th nonviolent protesters go free, that's in there as well. If you want to see the end of the Russia-Ukraine war, I say there are things Trump can do to bring that about. So you got to paint a picture of what a better world looks like January 20th, because if we just elect the same people, and Kamala Harris is the same people, we're just going to be in a worse position than we are now, because we're going to continue along the present path. Now, Americans do want new, fresh faces, which is also part of the excitement around Kamala Harris. They don't even have to dress her up that much with fancy rhetoric and fake policies. She's different, she's new, and so there are people who are going to be interested in her, even if they don't end up voting for her, precisely for that reason. Now, of course, she has been around for a long time, and she crashed out of the Democratic primary in 2020 before 2020 even rolled around. And she's been in office for years and years, and she was Joe Biden's vice president and so forth. But she's different than what people have been used to, and so you're going to see some public interest in that. But again, there's a space right now for Trump to talk about what he's going to do that's new and that's different. I've suggested things here like a national bicycle trail. I mean, that's something the president can actually enact on his own. You know, you've got to give people something fresh, some fresh ideas. And that's why I wrote the agenda.
Well, I tell you what, Joel, I wish what you just said, you had like a funnel into Donald Trump's ear so we could hear that, because that is excellent advice. I've heard others people championing that advice, and I fully support 100% what you just said, and I hope the people in the Trump campaign are listening. All right, we're going to take our final break, but when we come back, I do want to talk about what some influential pollsters are suggesting. I want to dive into some numbers in these swing states, and a little hint, the numbers on these polling things were wrong in 2016 and 2020, and this race right now is 1 point either way. Be back in 90 seconds.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most precious assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott Precious Metals at 720-605-3900. That's 720-605-3900.
720-605-3900. Reach out to Dr. Kirk Elliott. He's a friend of this show. All right, Joel, we've got, the media keeps telling us it's 84 days until Election Day, but you and I both know that's not really true. Early voting, folks, starts in 30 days. 30 days. Think about that. So we have a situation where we have a debate scheduled in early September that has been agreed to. There's a potential for another debate 2 weeks after that, hosted on NBC. So people will be voting before we've even had some of these debates. So, Joel, right now, the polling is, Harris is up by 1 point in the Real Clear Politics average. I know there's been some polling that shows Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania a lead outside that margin of error. But what the media doesn't talk about, we also saw two polls, one from CNBC, one from the Trafalgar Group, which has been notoriously accurate in the last 4 or 5 presidential elections. Robert Cahaley runs that outfit. And those show Donald Trump up in the swing states. So, Joel, I have this belief that even if Trump loses Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, where I think that's problematic, and Wisconsin is a toss-up, but for argument's sake, if he lost that, he could still win the Electoral College by winning Pennsylvania and by winning Georgia, which, again, in the Real Clear Politics average, he's up by less than a point average in those two states. Given that we're going to have early voting, Joel, coming up in 30 days, and given that these poll numbers are so tight, Cahaley and others are recommending that Trump clearly differentiate himself, get out there, talk about issues, because he's going to, as you said earlier in the show, forget the Democrats. He's not going to win them over, but he has to hit those swing state independent voters, that small sliver. So, Joe, again, 30 days until early voting, 2 debates coming up. If you were advising the Trump campaign, and you've given them some great advice so far, how should they focus in these really what I deem critical next 30 days of this campaign?
Again, don't worry about early voting. The whole system is cracked, all right? There's no real democracy anymore when you have early voting, vote by mail, registration on the same day. It's all garbage. But just think about it as a different contest. This is no longer an election where you're trying to persuade people to go one way or the other. This whole thing works now like this. There are Democrats out there and there are Republicans out there. There are Democratic ballots out there, more specifically, and Republican ballots. The job of each party is to go around and collect as many ballots as they possibly can that are going to go for their side. Now, you can't ballot harvest in every state, but you've got to make sure that piece of paper that they're going to put in the mail, usually, gets to where it's going. And so, yeah, Democrats are going to vote early, and they're not going to wait to hear what all the positions are. They're not going to wait. As I said, they don't care about issues. So they're not going to wait for the debates if they happen after early voting starts, and they're not going to wait for whatever interviews Kamala Harris might do in late October. Late October is too late. Used to be that was just fine, right? The weekend before the election in November was still a time when people were making up their minds and the electorate hadn't voted yet. That's not the way it works anymore. Now it's like a cleanup exercise. You know, you ever tell your kids to clean up their rooms? You know, they've got to grab all the stuffed animals and put them in one box and grab all the Legos and put them in another box. That's what this is. Republicans have to go out there and grab all the ballots that Republican voters might cast. And they can do it the way Democrats do it. They can do vote by mail. They can do ballot harvesting where it's legal. But more than that, they've got to motivate their voters to get out there and vote, take other people to vote, submit ballots by mail, do whatever you can within the law to vacuum up those Republican votes. It's really just a matter of who gets more paper in the box at the end of the day. And Trump needs to talk to his supporters and the independents who want to be inspired. They want to know that even though the system is rigged, they can still beat it. That's what people need to know. That's the message he's got to send, that you're going to beat a rigged system and save America. And talk about the agenda. Talk about what day one looks like. Talk about the things in my book. Talk about the things that he can do right away as president. Not the things in an aspirational sense, you know, if we get Congress on board and we're going to work on this. No, go for it. Do exactly these things. Cancel the student loan forgiveness that's driving up inflation. Build the border wall. Force Ukraine and Russia to sit down together. Make sure every White House meeting opens with a prayer. You can do that and help restore faith in this country. You don't need to have a whole discussion about it. Just do it. These are things Trump can do. And this is what victory looks and feels like. So that's what he's got to do. You basically have to go out there and say to your Trump-supporting Republican voters, you want to take your country back, this is how you do it. And we're not really about winning arguments anymore. There's nobody in the country you can convince aside from the independent voters, and basically Kamala Harris has given up on them. So they're basically Republicans. So go out there, make the case to them, and then inspire them to vote. That's what Trump has to do.
Yeah, excuse me, Joel. I think you're right about that. And I think his most effective way, and I look back at the 2016 campaign, Joel, he was doing those intense rallies. I mean, they became a phenomenon. They got covered, and as he continues, if he will do that strategy, again, it's fine what he did on X Spaces yesterday. It's fine that he did his presser from Mar-a-Lago. Great, okay. But Trump is really, really effective when he gets out there in front of an audience. He feeds off of it. I mean, I'll give you a line from his Musk interview last night. I mean, Trump, who I know personally, he's a funny guy, and he comes across that way in a lot of settings, which is why a lot of people love him. But Musk asked him last night about, when he was almost assassinated. And Trump had this funny line. He says, boy, if it wasn't for illegal immigration, I might not be here. So he says, I have to thank the illegal immigrants for saving my life. I mean, funny, offhand. But again, that's Trump being Trump. And I think, with all the negative press that Trump gets, he is his most effective when he goes out there, he talks to his audience, and his audience relates to him. That's why, remember in the 2016 campaign when he said, I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and I wouldn't be arrested. Well, maybe not, but you understand the point. So I think if Trump does that, Joel, I'm buying what you're selling here. I think it's a good argument. And I think if he will position himself like that, then I think things will work out good. A couple minutes left, Joel. One other comment. I found it somewhat humorous because we've talked about Joe Biden and, who's really running the country right now? Is it Barack Obama? Is it Susan Rice? I don't know, but boy, it sure as heck is. It's not Joe Biden. Joel, I mean, every time you see him, he looks worse. I hate saying this as a citizen of our country, but I want our president to look good regardless of what party he is. And man, every time I see Joe Biden, he just looks terrible. I saw today where Harris is going to go on a campaign event with Joe Biden in, of all places, folks, Maryland. Joe, what is the chance that Joe Biden's going to have an impact in Maryland on this campaign race?
Zero. And the Democrats don't want to hear from him. They don't want to see him. They want to thank him for his service and kick him out the door. They don't want to have anything to do with him. He was dragging them down. He knows it. They know it. And they just want to focus on the future. And they don't want to tell you what their policies are, but they do want to talk about winning. They do that a lot better than Republicans do. They say things like, when we vote, we win. Republicans need that message to go out to supporters as well. Look, I don't think Joe Biden matters except in one sense. Republicans can point to Biden and say, this is who they sold you last time. You were told that if you voted for this guy, he could do the job, and he can't do the job. Now you're being asked to vote for someone else who's never done a good job at anything she's ever done, and you're being told that she can deliver for 4 years. She is as incompetent as Joe Biden, maybe worse, as Donald Trump said in that Twitter interview. And the same people who lied to you in 2020 are going to lie to you again about the ability of the Democratic Party nominee. You should vote for someone who's got a track record of success as president, who has the ability to go on an interview for 2 hours and talk. And, it's hard. It's not easy. And who's got the energy to do this. And she doesn't. So I think that's what you have to do.
Yeah, she doesn't have the energy, and she doesn't have the intellect either. Joel, I really want to thank you for coming on today. And folks, go out and look at Joel's book, The Agenda, Donald Trump's First 100 Days. And I would encourage you to do something else too. Joel works at Breitbart. Some of you may remember Andrew Breitbart. He was a conservative icon, and Breitbart is a great website. And Joel, again, thank you for coming on today. It's been my pleasure having you as my guest on Election Edge. All right, folks, that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more hard-hitting information. Stick with Patriot TV. See you on Election Edge tomorrow.
I don't know about you, but I have to have that cup of coffee in the morning. And Kingdom Cup is mold-free, it is pesticide-free, and it is organic. It's got this flavor that is delicious. You don't even have to put cream or sweetener in it.
Why did we go with the bean form, the whole bean? Because ultimately the powder form is the one that gathers the most moisture. And that means the more potential mold development. This is actually organic mold-free certified. That's important because ultimately people drink coffee. It's cultural. And so we tried to meet the culture where it is and create a healthy alternative.
Make the healthy choice for you and your family. Try mold-free, pesticide-free, and it's organic. Delicious Kingdom Cup coffee. And it's available now at the Patriot TV store. Go to patriot.tv and click on store. You'll find Kingdom Cup coffee in the health and wellness section. Order Kingdom Cup coffee at the Patriot TV store now.